Hello, I'm Shane Seeley, and this is Face to Face. I want to start today's program by wishing everyone a happy Mayday. I know it's not Mayday as usual when the workers would hit the road and we would have a big gathering and a celebration. We can't do that right now because of the pandemic. COVID-19 has changed our lives in every way, and on Mayday we are seeing much of the same. We are at home today for the most part because of those COVID-19 protocols. The recent bank holidays, we've been told to stay put to curb the spread of COVID-19. And this May Day is much of the same. So today I have the pleasure of speaking to the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union and also the MP for St. George North, Toni Moore. And she's in studio with me, but we're following the protocols, doing the social distancing, as you can see right here in our Studio A at our CBC headquarters in the Pine. But good to have you on the program, Toni, and happy May Day to you as well.
Thanks, Shane, and happy May Day to you, and a happy May Day to not only our BW members and workers, but to the entire Barbados.
Okay, let's start by going back to happier times when we would be on the road, following the route, then down to Browns Beach for those major speeches from the social partnership, those members of the social partnership. Of course, labor, government, and the private sector. And I mean, the last time we were on the outside for May Day celebrations, it was a bit different too. So take us back to 2019, Toni, when we changed the format for May Day celebrations here in Barbados.
Yes, as you said, we would normally pay our tribute at the Sir Frank Walcott statue in front of the NIS building on those previous occasions which you mentioned. But in 2019, the Barbados Workers Union decided that we should do things a little differently and create more of a family atmosphere right at our home base at Solidarity House. So in 2019, we had a family fun day where we had a number of stalls set up. We planned different activities. There were cook-offs, mixology competition. We had a whole setup in our auditorium where we allowed manufacturers to display their products. We had the Diabetes Association, HIV/AIDS doing checks. It was a total family fun day. Of course, our usual entertainment packages and so on. And then we introduced for the first time a karaoke competition that was a big hit. Wow. And many of our members really looked forward to competing on future occasions. But of course, that was the last time we were able to host that event. However, this year, we will do it, but we will do it in virtual format, but more about that when we get there.
Yeah, at least we still can share some of that enjoyment on this May Day. And the change in the format is one of the major things that you did on assuming office as General Secretary. Talk about that road. How has it been for you so far?
Has not been a predictable road for sure. I think that on assuming the position as General Secretary, I had many preconceptions of what that role would have entailed. But certainly starting the journey, not only as it relates to May Day, but as it relates to a number of other things, experience has taught me differently. Specifically as it related to the May Day event, I thought that when I say I mean the Executive Council of the day, held a view that we should do things a little differently. What we had recognized over time is that in having May Day in the format where we did the march from the garrison over to Browns Beach, following the traditional route, what we recognize is that over time, a lot more people were joining us on the beach as opposed to participating in the march itself. And that signaled that maybe we could do things differently and create the family atmosphere minus the march, but paying tribute as well to our heroes, not only Sir Frank, but other union leaders and some sung and unsung heroes of the union as well. And that's what we included into the day, the family atmosphere, but we also did the tributes, and it was a hit. and it's something that we look forward to building on whenever we get over COVID.
And you speak about COVID-19. The COVID-19 climate has also dictated how you as General Secretary have been able to operate and work around problems in the workplace. Talk about some of those issues created by COVID-19 and how they would have affected your leadership and how you handled issues related to workers and the workplace.
COVID-19 has certainly thrown up a number of challenges, and at the Barbados Workers Union, just like other places, we've seen a number of opportunities occasioned by this virus as well. One of the things that was startling for the BWU, and we had to adapt to very quickly, like many other organizations, was being thrown into a virtual reality. Now, I would be the first to admit that the Barbados Workers Union was not an organization that was well up there when it came to being technologically advanced. A union, a trade union by its very nature, is built around camaraderie and human interaction, face-to-face interaction. So the use of technology in a lot of our processes, our education processes, the way we conduct meetings and so on, was never something that we did on any large scale. But with COVID-19, we didn't have a choice, as did many other organizations didn't have a choice. Schools didn't have a choice. Churches didn't have a choice. And so we had to adapt very, very quickly to conducting meetings using the different media such as Zoom and Google Meets and WebEx. We had to be conducting negotiations via those same means. Certainly, we were thrown into a lot of grievance management, as on account of the pandemic, many organizations moved to laying off workers, putting people on short time, and we were managing these issues, but doing it remotely. And hats off to our officers who were able to adapt very quickly to that new mode to ensure that our goal, our objective, our mandate of representation could have kept strong even amidst the challenges. And what we've seen now is COVID-19 has occasioned that, and it not only has become a response, an emergency response of ours, but we have recognized the need for us to focus a lot of our energies ensuring that going forward, even while we anticipate and look forward to those times, those occasions where we can be together in a more intimate setting and more camaraderie being observed through the physical and human interaction, we've recognized that technology and the use of technology is going to be here to stay, and we are happy for the opportunity to have been able to adapt as responsively as we have so that we can manage the different challenges that are being thrown up at us as an organization and that are confronting our workers as we seek to represent them.
I would imagine that workers' rights is at the top of the list of issues when dealing and when the union is looking at addressing challenges facing workers. One of the things that the pandemic brought about with it, and you mentioned it briefly there, was the layoff situation here in Barbados. Widespread layoffs, something that could not be helped because the tourism sector would have taken a major hit. Tourists weren't coming in. And even when that started to happen again, it was not at the same level. So there were a number of things that the union had to adapt to along with the technology really quickly. Talk about the adaptation strategy towards the major fallout in what is the biggest money earner for Barbados tourism.
Thanks, Jim. When we look at tourism, that is one that hit us pretty hard. That is one that has hit us not only at the level of government, not only at the level of the union and the workers, but the employers suffered directly the impact. And not only employers in tourism, but employers in linkage areas as well, linkage businesses. So the union, for instance, if I focus there, tourism workers made up a large chunk of our membership. In fact, hotel workers are our largest single division. And when I say single division, it's a collection of hotel establishments that form the BHTA. And so with the fall off in tourism, the country not only experienced that fall off, but the union experienced that fall off in a major way, as some in the region of 10% of our membership was impacted either by short-term or longer-term layoff. So in terms of an adaptation strategy, what the Barbados Workers Union sought to do, recognizing that tourism workers who have been at the heart, the center of pushing our economy forward so that they ought not to have been disadvantaged, the union not only sought to adapt through different means of coping with the fallout and ensuring that these workers got their due in the earliest possible time, but we also moved to negotiate a work retention strategy, which the government eventually took on board and introduced the BEST program, so that hotel workers who were interested, who were keen to do so, had the opportunity not simply to accept a severance, but to work along through this rough period for them, for the hotels that they work at, and for the country as a whole, while still maintaining some level of income, 80% of their income. Regrettably, not enough establishments, in our view, have taken advantage of the opportunity because it's no obligation for them to join. But even within the last 2 months or so, we've seen a few more establishments come on board, not only because it provides benefit to them themselves in terms of having a source of revenue to help with their greening and training of staff, but it also provides a level of stability for workers who, if they had taken severance, by now many of them would have exhausted the payments that they would have received.
Indeed. And when we come back, we'll take a quick break here. We want to talk a bit more about the BEST program and why that is the best solution, as far as the union believes, for going forward in dealing with workers in the tourism sector during this pandemic. Back with you on this edition, the Mayday edition of Face to Face with Toni Moore, the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union and MP for St. George North. And we left our conversations speaking about the BEST program and how it worked for workers in the tourism sector. Toni, you were explaining to me some of the positives of the program and how it began to evolve to help the workers at that level.
Right, Shane, as I said, the program was initiated through discussions really to look at how the country might need to modify the severance payment legislation to address a number of the challenges that were being occasioned by COVID-19. It was the union's suggestion that because tourism was and is as critical to our country in terms of mobilizing the economy and so on, that it became necessary for us not to let down our workers who have been the backbone pretty much of our economy for as long as they had been. So the Barbados Workers Union suggested that we look at a job retention strategy, recognizing that there were many workers in tourism who would not want to take their severance. Many people average 10 years, 15 years in the industry, and a severance based on 15 years will yield a kind of reward that by the time one accounts for mortgages and other bills that you would have to satisfy, it would leave the worker with not much of a guarantee And given the uncertainty that COVID presented and the fact that no one could say when things would be booming again within the industry, whether it would be 6 months, whether it would be a year, whether it would be 2 years. And certainly at that time, July last year, we were getting projections that it could be as much as 3 years before the sector rebounded.
Yeah.
Then it became necessary for us to find a measure that would offer the worker support and then would also provide the establishment with an opportunity to utilize that time to build back better. And so a scheme that would see them training and upskilling staff and greening their establishments was what resulted. The BWU is proud of that at its conception. But like anything else in the rollout, there have been challenges as, but you asked me to focus on positive. If I focus on positives, people have been trained and hotels have started the process of renovating their establishments and so on so that they become a lot more modern and energy efficient. But on the downside of that, there have been complaints that workers are not receiving the level of training and so on that they've anticipated. And some feel that their skill sets are being applied to areas that are not necessarily areas of their interest. So there's still things that we constantly work through, but underpinning the concept of a work retention strategy is what we are pleased to see. The fact that even although wages are reduced by some 20%, and even although overall income would be impacted by the fact that you don't have a steady flow of visitors providing for occupancy levels that would have paid a service charge, let's say, at the level that one would have received in 2019, we are still satisfied that through this means there's opportunity for people to be able to keep their heads above waters. And that's why whenever we hear about the challenges, we are constantly presenting them so that the system can be adequately refined and tweaked so that it provides the maximum benefit to the worker.
Yes, and anything new, there would be normally some tweaks that would need to be made as you go along. As you said, there were some establishments you wish the level of uptake by the private sector, by those establishments would have been better. What do you think was the challenge for them in taking up this offer?
For some employers, it related to ownership and equity issues because there are some properties, for instance, that are not owned by the people who are actually running the establishments, but there might be leased and other contractual arrangements that are in place. And so there were varying reasons for hoteliers and establishments in tourism more widely for not taking on the prescriptions that the BEST program outlined initially. The program has been tweaked over time to facilitate some of the concerns that were raised, and so there are some other properties that we're seeing coming on board. And then within the hotel sector, we have an arrangement where, although there's one negotiation, you have luxury class hotels, for instance, A class hotels, and you have B class and apartments and so on. And so the levels of compensation varied, and there were few establishments who actually presented alternatives to the BEST program that offered workers, in some instances, greater benefits and greater opportunities by going with their hotels program. And where we recognized that was the case, the Barbados Workers Union supported it. So just like anything else, as you rightfully mentioned, there's a transition, there's a learning curve, and we have had to be learning and adjusting very quickly as we go.
And speaking about that learning curve, during which, of course, would have been dominated by COVID-19, there were some flare-ups that you had to deal with during this pandemic in terms of industrial action.
Yes.
And the union, the Barbados Workers Union, seemed to be on top of things because, as far as I remember, very quickly these matters were settled in a matter of days. Talk to us about some of those challenges on that end, dealing with the industrial relations climate across the country at some entities and handling those pockets of problems as they popped up.
I'm glad you raised that question, because this one has been the whole situation that you've captured has presented some interesting scenarios. Wherever the Barbados Workers Union, as the representative body for the unions, was involved and was required to make representation on behalf of our workers, we have been able to do so in most cases. And I qualify that. Let me explain that. I say in most cases because some instances have not been straightforward. And there are still a few instances where people, for instance, may not have received their severance pay, where severance became possible. And that relates to information and misinformation, or different types of information being presented to the NIS and so on, which has still to be worked through. But for the most part, wherever severance was the option that workers took, and I'm speaking when I say for the most part, if I get into figures, it would be in 95% of the cases we have been able to resolve those as a BWU. But why I say that it has thrown up some interesting scenarios is because we went through a period where we saw a spate of worker responses, strikes and so on, or protests, seeming protests being taken. And sometimes in the midst of those, you will hear the BWU's name being called in circumstances where, one, the BW wasn't even the representative voice for some of the main spokespersons in those instances, or two, where the BWU represented some of the people, the BWU was never called upon to intervene. And that's an interesting scenario that, as General Secretary, I see playing out time and time again, where workers may have access to the BWU, refuse to make access or make use of the BWU, resorting to other means that probably seem to be a lot more loud, a lot more in your face, but then expecting the BW still, after they've called attention to themselves, to jump in and fix the problem. And even though that has been the case in some instances where we had card-bearing members and we recognized that there was a challenge, and we reached out to them and they allowed us then, even belatedly, to step in on their behalf, we've done so. But recently we saw, just a few days ago, another situation like that, where some of the people who are saying that the union isn't doing anything for them themselves are not even union members and never approached the BWU, notwithstanding the fact that they're not union members, to do anything on their behalf. But what we have done through very mature discussions in cases where we were allowed to intervene, we have been able to appeal to the NIS, work through with the NIS, and get a number of the issues resolved. As I speak to you, there are literally about 15 individuals that the BWU still has to work on, and those 15 individuals come primarily from one institution. But generally, it has been a very challenging time. Our severance payment legislation does not make available to people a process where issues that relate to severance can be necessarily easily remedied. We have a system where matters go to severance payment tribunals, and we have a situation where the tribunal has over 1,600 claims as we speak under its purview. And one of the things that the union was insistent on that drove changes to the severance payment legislation, that in this very peculiar circumstance called COVID-19, that workers who have straightforward cases and workers who were being asked to defer their severance, given the challenges within the tourism industry, where they were then seeking severance as an option, that they had the opportunity to circumvent that regular process and have a specific arrangement under which they can access their severance and don't have to wait 10 years or 11 years while they wait in line for the issues to be resolved. And that is what the BWU has been about. And it has been working, as I said, in most cases, but there's still a few issues that would need to be resolved in that regard.
Yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done generally across the board by the workers' union, by government, the private sector as well. And we're going to come back to this and other topics, some controversial issues we will be talking about coming up on this edition of Face to Face. Back on Face to Face with Toni Moore, the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union, as we speak about some of those more controversial issues now that we would have been seeing playing out over the past few months and just during this period of pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. One of them is something that we've heard about from time to time pre-pandemic, about the level of unionization across the board in Barbados. Toni, what is your take on the situation as far as union membership goes in terms of the private sector, public sector? Are there still businesses and business owners that are trying to push out the union in these times in 2021?
Yes, that is certainly the case. But let me comment first of all on the levels of unionization. For some time now, for at least the past 25 years, the trade union movement has been concerned by the low levels of unionization. But this is not unique to Barbados, I should add. It is a common experience of trade unions across the world, that even as people need representation, even as people need to band together collectively in their own interests, more and more, we see fewer and fewer, generally speaking, that commit to being part of a union. And the trade union movement internationally and regionally has been concerned and has been trying a number of different things to keep people or get people interested in standing up for their own cause. COVID-19 was probably a situation thrown upon us last year that would add to those kinds of tension even more, because what we have found over time is that the reluctance of people has little to do with whether they perceive the union as being able to advance their cause, but people have become so fearful in terms of job security, for instance. I don't want to identify in case it costs me my job, but I still want the union to be able to step in there and speak on my behalf so that X or Y or Z is not a negative situation that confronts me. But you can't have it both ways. Over time, the union has been impressing on respective governments, successive governments, of the need to look at some form of agency legislation. So speaking of a controversial topic, that is it. Because what agency would do, it would provide a means by which people don't have to even identify with the union to get direct benefits from unionization. But they are paying, at least, they're paying their dues in the same way as union members. And so when representation has to take place, it seems a lot more equitable. So how agency will play out is you can pay instead of paying your dues to the union, you can pay your dues. You have to pay the same amount of dues that dues paying members would pay, but it can be assigned to the Diabetes Association, the Cancer Society, some charity of your choice. But the point of agency would be to bring balance to the playing field so that more people can pay something to the benefits that they derive, and you don't have this free rider kind of thing. But it would also encourage more people, those who are not joining for reasons of the money aspect. If you have to pay it anyhow, You could as well pay it to a trade union as they seek to represent on your behalf. So there are a number of interesting conversations that have come up over time to address the issue of union density, not only in Barbados, but in the region. And we continue to work with that. On the subject of if in 2021, we still have the problem, the answer is yes. Take the gas stations, for instance. We have tried over the years. I've joined the union in 2004. And for most of those years that I have been at that organization, we've been trying to get gas stations organized. But the experience is that each time you think you're moving in and getting the majority of workers at one gas station, then where the employer may have a franchise someplace else where they operate more than one gas station, people are shifted out. Or what you find is that they're terminated. And that is something that has been happening recently. So even where, and we will get, I know you can't allow me to leave this program without talking about a minimum wage, but that's why our efforts to safeguard vulnerable workers who are not card-paying members still remain as strong a focus as it has been over time for the BWU, because we realize that it's not only about our membership, but people need the union. People need representation, and even where they're not dues-paying members, we have the responsibility and we commit to fulfilling that responsibility to improving the lot of workers. And so we have been working very steadfastly in that regard, and we continue to build despite the tensions and the natural inclination it would seem to force unionization as a concept that should be as far removed from people's psyche as possible. We even get it in the universities where and institutions of learning where the topic comes up as the relevance of the union. But if not the union for some, then what? And we see it playing out when the union has to engage in industrial action, for instance. We have situations where if workers don't band together, if workers don't come together and stand up for what they know is their due, there's no other way that they're going to trigger it. And collectivity is the way that workers are able to counter the capital forces that can be so easily used against them. We've had instances in the last 2 years where the Barbados Workers Union has had requests before the Labor Department for recognition that is being fought. We have had a situation relating to an established division in the BWU that was trying to get just another arm, another grouping of workers brought over to the BWU, and we had to wait just over 2 years to get them recognized as the company fought. And the company even fought by saying that another union should be the union and not the BWU. So we have these attempts. We've seen a recent situation play out publicly, a dispute that we had with one company that was taking a negative position against workers for the simple fact that the workers were carrying out their functions as shop stewards. So as we live in 2021, a lot of the battles that many assume have been fought, so you don't have to worry about anymore, are battles that we still have to be overcoming today. And that is why, as long as there is an employment relationship, we know that there will be the need for people who are vulnerable and who cannot represent themselves, and even those who think that they can represent themselves but cannot, to need to join an organization that allows each person to gather strength from the other. And that's what a trade union is about.
Indeed. What is the trend among young people? Are that section of the population, the youth, are they eager now to join a union? What are their thoughts about unionization and union representation?
Well, certainly we have had to be targeting looking at ourselves, introspecting somewhat to determine how we can connect to a lot more young people in a society that is increasingly seeming to be highly individualistic. If we look at the characteristic of our membership is middle-aged to approaching retirement. When I say middle-aged, I consider 35 Shane to be middle-aged. So that includes people like you.
Oh dear.
Right? But for the younger people, being able to connect to them, that remains a challenge. And so the union has had to be looking at other ways that it can connect. And one of the ways that we have been trying to deal with this is by looking at our educational offerings. Well, you say how you can get young people through education, but a lot of our young people are interested in pursuing avenues of technology, artificial intelligence, digital, and so on. And that is why we have, and actually today, Mayday, we are going live with our Moodle platform that is targeted at capturing the interests of some of the younger people who want to learn certain things, and having the union present itself as an institution that can facilitate learning on their behalf. We have been engaging younger staff members as well, so that they too can have the opportunity within their circles, not to do unionization through the traditional means where an officer goes to a group of workers, but in their social setting, they might be able to reach out to other young people. We have also been targeting working along with other youth groups like the BYDC and so on, so that we start networking where young people are at, so that we get them to see the necessity for them to take responsibility for themselves, and that taking responsibility for self is not necessarily going it alone, but joining a group where support can be garnered and strength can be built by operating alongside other young people like themselves and learning from older people like us as well, Shane.
Older people like us as well.
Yes.
Well said. We'll take a quick break here, but when we come back, Toni, she's been balancing two hats now. Of course, the Member of Parliament for St. George North, and still being General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. How can she do that? How does she do that? These are things that we will examine when we return right here on Face to Face, the Mayday. Here on Face to Face, the Mayday edition, we're speaking to Toni Moore, the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. And you know that she's also the MP for St. George North. Yes. Now, there was a lot of controversy surrounding that. I have heard so many conversations, Toni, with the question at the center of it: how can you be General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union and a Member of Parliament for government? This is a good opportunity to explain the rationale for going ahead and jumping in to the role of a politician.
Thanks, Shane. I've heard many of those conversations as well, and I've remained undaunted by them because I've taken my cue as the General Secretary of the BWU from some who have left very large footprints for me to follow in. I speak of Sir Frank Walcott. I speak of Sir Hugh Springer, Sir Roy Trotman, Evelyn Graves, even Bobby Morris. And so in following in these footsteps, where those persons have not been only at the negative end of criticism, but have also been at the positive end of criticism. And I dare say that we just celebrated Heroes Day, and two of the names I mentioned are recognized as national heroes as well, it means that there is the possibility that it can be done. There is evidence that it can be done, and there is a need, perhaps, for it to be done. And that's why these people have been able to distinguish themselves. One of the objects of the Barbados Workers Union, Object 10 to be precise, is to have the organization participate in Parliament and in government bodies to pursue the interests of our membership and of workers more generally. So that is where I position my decision. That is where I center my decision. And while I say that, it is also true that when I came into the position of General Secretary back in 2014, it was never my interest to be involved in politics. I remember my predecessor, Sarai, telling me and constantly in my ears saying, it is a natural progression. Of course, I would retaliate and I would say, but for the last how many years you were General Secretary and you were not involved in partisan politics? And he kept reminding me that the union's place as a social organization in influencing social and economic positions will be determined by the conditions at the time. When he made his decision in 1994 not to be a general secretary that would be involved in partisan politics anymore, the dynamic was different. Then we were building a social partnership, and within that social partnership there was a coalition of trade unions, and the BWU was represented by that coalition. Now we are in a situation where there's still a coalition, but it certainly does not speak for the BWU. Sometimes it doesn't even speak with the BWU on issues. And so there has to be a different way that the Executive Council can see that it can advance the cause of the worker. So this is not a decision that was individual on my part, because perhaps left to me, I would avoid the limelight in the same way that I shied away from the challenge to accept the position of General Secretary in the first place. But I definitely think that this is what workers need right now. We fought for the period, like the first few years of my term as General Secretary in 2014 to 2018, calling for conversations with the government. That's both the private sector and the trade union fought for that. We have an opportunity now. The Executive Council sees that there is an opportunity not only for us to be in conversation, but to be influencing conversation. And that is what the Barbados Workers Union accepting a seat in the House of Assembly is all about. I am not daunted by the naysayers. And the interesting thing is, a lot of that resistance has not come from within the walls of the BWU and its membership. It's people on the outside who will have their own view, as they should. But what I have been doing, as have other leaders before me and other good examples within the Barbados Workers Union before me, I have been remaining focused, and I've been urging the Executive Council to remain focused so that we don't clamor to opinions and surrender to those who would want us to utilize our force and utilize our energies towards short-term gains alone. But we have been focusing and working steadfastly towards the longer-term advantage. And one of the first things, in less than 6 months, we have been able to influence a move towards a minimum wage for workers. That is no small feat. Of course, I salute the workers of G4S who were steadfast in their own issues to get fairness in their workplace, but who provided a launch pad for the union, a union that is able to influence decisions, not just make noise, but able to influence decisions, to use our influence in that exercise to bring about something that has more meaning, not just for G4S workers, but for the same gas station workers I mentioned, Shane, that we were trying to organize that can't be organized, for those who are working in small shops, for those who are domestic workers, to be able to have an opportunity so that their regular earnings could start to move towards something more that barely allows them to get by, but provides an opportunity for them to access health care, access housing, and so on. And that's why the BWU has been insistent, even while some other unions, not just the employers, have been saying that now is not the time. We have been insisting that now is definitely the time. And furthermore, there's a need for enhancement of where we have started. Because $8.50 or $9.25 in the case of security guards, let's face it, is not going to cut it. It's not going to help that person who is a low wage earner to be able to purchase a house, even if you have the whole project or whatever else. We have to be able to work towards uplifting our people. And it really bothered me, and I felt strongly about it as General Secretary, that some of the people who is saying it is something good, but it is not now, the time is not now to introduce it, are the ones who are concerned about their profit margins. You know, they're still making a profit, but so concerned about taking home a little less that they're blinded to the opportunities that this move right now in this crisis could mean for spending in the economy and for assisting people who need the enfranchisement, who need that little extra to hold on to keep themselves above water. So in terms of wearing two hats, I have proudly accepted the position to be the Member of Parliament for the good people of St. George North. And I take this opportunity to say Happy Mayday to you all. I see this as a win for workers and it's a win for the country. And the moment that there is a challenge where what the union represents and what the government is going after do not necessarily gel, I am sure that the Prime Minister and my party colleagues have no confusion as to what kind of hat I will wear. Because the thing is, we being the BWU, we are in the House of Assembly. We are in the House of Assembly as a backbencher. And that gives you always the right to influence positions, but also to maintain an independent position. And my independent position at all times will be one that speaks for the workers of the Barbados Workers Union until such time that they, not others, but they suggest that they don't want me there anymore.
Okay, and I'm not seeing that happening anytime soon. You mentioned just now that, that minimum wage, that movement towards that close to $9 or thereabout, it's just the beginning for you. What, in your opinion, should it be? What was the union pushing for?
There were a number of studies done, and there was a general view that the minimum could reside somewhere between $10, and the union was looking more at a living wage arrangement that could address the same challenge I said, not just a person being able to buy food and basic clothing, but a person being able to access housing, for instance. And we see that that minimum would push closer to $12.50. Now, it might seem out there, because if we were to introduce it all at once, it would be out there in terms of the impact that it would have. So what the Barbados Workers Union has called for is, and this was our position to the Minimum Wage Board and to the Blue Ribbon Committee that had been established, that we think that the minimum wage has to be relooked in another year or so, and a lot more analysis going into it to establish what indeed would be something that, a wage that doesn't only permit a person to get by, but allows people to contribute meaningfully and see that the whole notion of enfranchisement and being able to fend for themselves is something more than just words and something that is within their reach. So we are going to be insistent. We are going to be getting behind the government of Barbados not to stop short at $8.50, not to stop short at $9.25 for the security worker, but to push past towards improvements that would bring true meaning and enfranchisement to our people.
And this is just among the a number of improvements that we know that the Barbados Workers Union and the union movement in general will be pushing for in the weeks, the months, and the years ahead.
Definitely.
A year, you're looking to review that minimum wage legislation and taking it further. And we're wishing you all the best, especially for the workers as we celebrate them on this May Day. Toni, I really want to thank you for sharing your experience and sharing your knowledge and what the union is doing and the union's perspective, even in government, right here with us on this edition of Face to Face, the May Day edition. Thank you again. And thank you, viewers, for spending some time with us on this bank holiday. See you next time.
Happy May Day.